So we had a chat about a year ago, 2024 outlook that we did. How did it stack up versus what you thought was going to happen versus what actually happened?
2024, Aaron, was one of the very rare years that there wasn't any significant change to macro level fundamentals.
Perth, you've acknowledged, has been a strong performer. However, in our chats in the past, you said you haven't purchased there.
There's a digital footprint of this, Aaron. People can go on the Propertyology website and you'll see that from 2019, every calendar year through to including the one we've just started, our market outlook report, we have forecast Perth market outlook to be strong, and it's been strong.
So what are your top picks, and what are the reasons that you're getting that forecast to be either really strong or quite mediocre?
It's never one thing. I said at the start of this interview, it's the combined sum of all factors. Many of the factors we consider are expressed numerically, but the most valuable information is not expressed numerically at all. It's circling back and sounding very robotic, repeating the same thing. It's local economic performance. So you're not going to get the answer to that secret sauce from a number in a spreadsheet.
How does an investor stack the deck in their favour in 2025?
Always remember, whether it's 2025 or any single year, the best time to invest is as soon as you can afford to.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I love when we can kick off the new year with a bang, bring in a guest that really kind of, I'm going to say, puts their balls on the line a little bit when it comes to going, what's going on in the market for the year ahead. He's no stranger to, one, an opinion, but two, really having conviction in his opinion as well. Simon Pressley from Propertyology, Hall of Famer, been in the industry for quite a number of decades, mate, but I'm looking at you now going, you look bloody fit as. Simon, how you doing?
I'm very good, Aaron. I might, a few grey hairs, but that's what happens when you're 54, right?
Mate, you're 54, but you're bloody taking care of yourself. Look at you.
I've always been, exercise and nutrition have always been staples of how I choose to live my life. Thank you for the compliment.
No, not at all, mate. I think when people, something that I personally love about, say, gym, fitness, whatever your routine is, it's such a level playing field. We've all got the same time in the day. Everyone's access, usually the same resources, but obviously you do something, you choose to work on yourself. I think, when someone works on themselves, it really shows up in other areas of their life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think nutrition is actually more important than exercise. Not to say that exercise is not important, of course it is, but nutrition is probably 70% of the secret, I think.
It's what's the saying, what goes in, it's what you're feeding yourself literally through your mouth and also through your brain. So I really hope that if you're plugging into this podcast, we'll be feeding your brain with some really, really good property insights as well. As a lot of episodes, I like to do a lot of research when I get a great guest on like Simon coming in to make sure that we get the most out of our time together. So I really hope you enjoy our chat because I am absolutely excited. Simon, we had a chat about a year ago, and if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend jumping onto that 2024 outlook that we did. So it feels full circle coming back for 2025. If you had a chance, and you would have had a chance to reflect on your predictions and the outlook, how did it stack up versus what you thought was going to happen versus what actually happened?
Yeah, look, there wasn't any 2024, Aaron, was one of the very rare years that there wasn't any significant change to macro level fundamentals. No major policy changes or no unexpected blue moon global events that significantly impact jobs or household budgets or anything like that. So whether it's me or anybody else, like how property markets performed in respect to initial forecasts, we got no excuses. Because most years there's something that's like, well, I couldn't have known that. So there was none of that in sort of 2024.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much. I think when we read your report, you looked at probably the three, and then there's a bonus part to your outlook, which was 1, house equity, 2, wage growth, 3, the tight supply, and then really that what you called the joker was the income tax cuts. So when you go 4 elements, I mean, when you think about it, household equity, that was there. Wage growth has been strong in the last few years as well. We've obviously seen a tightening in the supply market. I think that will continue on for some time to come, mainly due to the number of builders that went under last year and the way that looks. And then the last one is the income tax cuts, which personally, when I speak to a lot of people, they may have got a few extra dollars in their bank account, but do they actually feel cash richer. So while it may, not nudge that borrowing capacity up just a smidge, they're looking at this going, but I don't actually feel a lot cash richer in my bank account too.
No, but the reason for highlighting those things is every single year, Aaron, the media is guilty, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not necessarily so, but the media is guilty on fixating on one thing, and almost always that one thing is negative. And it's never one thing that influences, that dominates property markets. It's the combined sum of a big range of things. And I wanted to highlight in the 2024 Outlook report some of the positive things that will have an influence on property markets. Because leading up to that, all the hell we heard about every single day was rising interest rates. And then the psyche of 27 million Australians, because rising interest rates is not a positive thing, they said, well, there's a negative thing, so therefore you're going to get a negative performance. Well, no, it's a negative trend among a big bunch of stuff. And everyone evaluating property markets every single day, you need to be mindful of the combined sum of all factors and not what I call the metric of the moment, the thing that's dominating commentary at any particular point in time.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So let's go around the grounds, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here and see where you were with the major cities and how they actually performed. So you work in ranges when you talked about your capital growth forecast for the year of 2024. So we start with Perth, 13 to 18%. I've got Perth. This is CoreLogic data coming out at say 19% on performance.
Yeah. So double-digit growth, 10% in a calendar year for an individual city doesn't happen very often. On average, an individual city might experience 10% growth maybe once or twice a decade. When you get above 15% in an individual calendar year, I mean, that's what we would call a super boom, and Perth certainly had that in 24 as we forecast.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much. Brisbane, 9 to 13% was your prediction or your forecast. Brisbane did 11%. So again, pretty much bang on what you thought Brisbane was going to do.
Yeah, Brisbane cops a lot of commentary about internal migration. I think that's why people have been anticipating for some years that Brisbane's property market will do well. There's no doubt that Brisbane does benefit from internal migration, but it doesn't get anywhere near the amount of internal migration that people think. I think they focus on how many people moving to Queensland, and they just assume that Queensland's just Brisbane. But Brisbane's got a strong economy, and that's the main reason any property market does well, is the local economy.
Yeah, as a local, mate. I mean, I think I read the other day, it's now got the 10th city in the world for traffic congestion.
I read that and ignored it. It's like, people who rate most livable city. I'm like, how do you define that? It's like saying everyone likes steak. Well, some people do, some people don't. Like some of these things that people do, it must be a slow news day.
Mate, I'll tell you what, I have I'm sure you're the same. I've traveled to all parts of the world, and let me tell you, like Mexico City, Brazil, been to, Japan I've seen, Sri Lanka's terrible.
Yeah.
I reckon I could rattle off 10 cities that I've just traveled to, let alone the rest of the world. That's shot. Bangkok is absolutely shocking. Kuala Lumpur recently was shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And which street are you talking about? There's plenty of streets in Brisbane that, everyone tries to avoid because you're going to be sitting in traffic for a long period of time, but you can say that about every location. But anyway, the media will do what they do, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're listening, that's exactly what we're trying to get to, which is don't believe everything that you're reading either. Sometimes it's just eyeballs that they're trying to really push. Adelaide, 8 to 12% was your outlook. Adelaide did 13%.
Yeah, thereabouts. Adelaide, very different city to Brisbane. But interestingly, the property market of Brisbane and Adelaide, in terms of the timing of their respective cycles, that tracked each other. The reason for it, I said it earlier, both cities' economies are performing well. But in regards to internal migration, Adelaide has actually been losing population from internal migration, and it typically does that every year, although not by a lot.
There you go. Thanks very much. Sydney, 3 to 7%, and it did 2%.
Okay, yeah. So did it well? It depends on which numbers you're talking about. Some other numbers will say Sydney grew by 5%. What actually happened in 2024 for Sydney It was more about the last 4 months of the calendar year where mild declines in property values. And if you're losing, 0.5% per month, that compounds up over, a period of 6 months or so. So Sydney's start of the year reasonably strong, not booming, but it started 2024 reasonably strong. By the end of the year, it was in decline territory.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much. Darwin, and I think we're going to come back to Darwin a little bit later. So Darwin's 3 to 6%, and it did just under 1% or thereabouts.
So I was a little bit more optimistic this time last year than how Darwin actually performed.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks very much. We're covered Perth. What do we got next? Hobart, 2 to 4%, and it went down by just under 1%.
Yeah. Hobart's been flat, officially Australia's best performed property market over the last 20 years. But Hobart, when the interest rates started to go up, Hobart's one of several cities throughout Australia. I'm talking more a few other regional locations, Aaron, that had a very long growth cycle already by the time the RBA cycle commenced. And it just knocked the confidence out of the market. So Hobart's been flat for now 2 consecutive years.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Melbourne, which I think is going to be a big chat that will be part of our discussion as well. Melbourne up to 0 to 3%. That did negative 3%.
Yes,
so
a decade of doldrums is how I'm describing Melbourne. It's halfway through that.
Halfway through that. So you think there's still a bit more pain to go for Melbourne?
I don't think the market is going to crash, but everything's always relative. Whatever Melbourne's property market does in a typical year for the foreseeable future, I'm measuring it against, what the majority of markets are doing. So if you own property in Melbourne, my commentary, which is intentionally very, very critical, but that's not to imply you should be selling, you're going to lose 20% of value. I'm saying relative to the rest of Australia, already Melbourne has been officially the worst performed property market. That's all capital cities and all regions. Melbourne's been the worst performed property market in Australia across the last 5 years.
Wow.
And I can't see the clouds being replaced by sunshine in Melbourne for quite some time, because it's actions that will change that, and those who have the ability to take action seem to have no apparent interest in doing that.
Cool. So let's talk about this, because everyone throws out a Warren Buffett quote, which is be greedy when others are fearful, and they're going, right, if everyone's exiting the Melbourne market, that's my cue to get in. Is that mentality, zig when others are zagging? Is that something that you go, all right, you could be early to the party, you won't be wrong, for example? How do you then kind of have that conversation with people going, well, this is the opportunity to get in, Simon?
Yeah. I would say anyone who's contemplating, even thinking about it, let alone acting, anyone who's contemplating investing in Melbourne now, you would only do so if you have an extremely unhealthy confirmation bias. So someone who lives in Melbourne and I love Melbourne and I want to own a property, that's retail therapy mindset. That's not elite financial decision-making mindset. In regards to, the time to be greedy and the time to be fearful, that's a great statement. But share markets and property markets are different, very, very different beasts, right? There are people who might, the Warren Buffetts of the world and others who might buy some shares in the morning and sell them in the evening. And there are others who'll buy them and hold them a long time. But with property, you don't have the luxury of both. With property, because the transaction costs to get in and then to subsequently get out, you're talking a basic house bought somewhere in Australia today for $650,000 and then sold in, say, 5 years' time, you will spend $100,000 in transaction costs.
Yeah. So
trading in and out is not the way to do property. Therefore, that is the Warren Buffett quote, time to be fearful, time to be greedy, is irrelevant. Never ever do that as a property investor. Property markets are not tennis balls. They are not. They don't bounce. It's not like they've dropped, so now they're going to buy. That's not how property markets perform. There are case studies, going across more than 100 years, where some markets have had very little growth for a decade. So the person who says my decision for buying in location X, whether it's Melbourne now or anywhere else, purely because it's been flat for a few years, there is no intelligence behind that decision. That's just doing it and saying, I'll cross my fingers now because it's got to grow soon. Geez, properties are so expensive. Why would you just buy on a hunch that it must be due? There's no such thing as turns in property markets. Melbourne has had a period, we go back to the 90s, when median house price didn't move for 7 years. Did not move for 7 years. So what we need to do is focus on what are the things that actually influence performance and pick markets that have those characteristics. Melbourne has all the characteristics that no investor wants to see.
Okay. And what are those characteristics?
Lots of very, very unattractive, unappealing high taxes, horrible rental legislation for landlords. So a state government that has accumulated the single biggest debt of any government in this country by an absolute mile. The cost to now Victorians is the monthly interest bill on that debt that's nearly $300 billion. The monthly interest bill now is close to $1 billion. So if you're managing a business, at the end of the day, I guess, state governments have to make a lot of financial decisions as an elite business owner would do. If you're managing a business and when you turn the lights on day one, you've got to find $1 billion revenue just to cover your overdraft, you've got a lot of challenges, right? So what that means is investment in the public sector workforce, no money to do that. Investment in infrastructure, no money to do that. Investment in marketing the beautiful city of Melbourne, no money to do that. So they're having to cut on things that actually create growth and create economic prosperity. Now, you don't just wipe off $300 billion by flicking the switch or anything like that. There's going to be some major decisions that will need to be made, whether it's the current government or someone else, potentially for a decade or more. That is an enormous debt. And this is not nice for anyone to hear this information, right? Yeah. I love Melbourne, but loving something and wanting something to happen, it's not a footy team. You can't stand on the sidelines and cheer it and make it perform better, right? You need to focus on what are the things that influence market performance and how are those characteristics now. I can talk about Melbourne, the cows come home. Population growth. So people who think that's the secret sauce. So in the last 2 years alone, Melbourne has had an all-time record high population growth from overseas migration. All-time record high. Just not from other forms of population, just from overseas migration. 160,000 people over the last 2 years. Never seen anything like it before. Melbourne's median house price over that last 2 years, unmoved. 2 years of zero growth. A city like Perth, we were talking about earlier, over the same 2 years, 30% growth. 82,000 people who used to live in Melbourne, 82,000 Australians have relocated away from Melbourne over the last 5 years. Melbourne normally maintains a fairly neutral position for internal migration. You're talking plus or minus 1,000 people per year. For when you got population of 5.2 million, 1,000 people per year is nothing, right? But to lose 82,000 people in just 5 years, that's enough people to build a city the size of Coffs Harbour or Rockhampton, which are nearly 200 years old. Melbourne's lost that in 5 years. There's a lot of stuff, mate, that's not nice.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, and I'm sure everyone listening would appreciate that because they're all hearing, and I see it all the time in property investor forums and Facebook groups going, "This is the time to be buying in Melbourne." And you got some people that are sprouting their own opinions, and yeah, sure, people can certainly buy where they want to as well. But it's almost that what I'm looking for is that secret sauce, and what I'm hearing is there's two parts: there's the foundations and there's the fundamentals to where you're buying and what you're buying as well.
Yeah, confirmation biases, we've all got them. Yeah. Whether it's property, whether it's food, whether it's fashion, we've all, I want something to happen. I like something, right? But property markets don't have ears. Property markets don't have feelings. So it doesn't know what Aaron and Simon like. And at the end of the day, even if it was somehow able to compute that, how can it satisfy what one person likes and someone else likes the opposite? So if you want to be an intelligent investor, you need to recognize that you have a confirmation bias and never allow it to influence your decision. My home city of Brisbane is my home city. It's not my property market. What Brisbane's property market does, it will do what it does, right? But Brisbane, if you went on a clock back to 2009, you add 10 years to that, we got to 2019. Yeah. Apartments in Brisbane had literally zero growth in 10 years. Zero growth for a decade. House prices in Brisbane over that same decade, 19% across 10 years. We've just been talking about Perth having that in 1 year. Imagine investing in an asset and then 10 years after you've bought it, you've just had 19% growth, and knowing that plenty of other parts of Australia have had between 70% and 100%. That's the danger of a confirmation bias. Plenty of people, back in that year, 2009, 2010, went, I'm going to invest in Brisbane because it's been flat. It's got to be due.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a big part of it going. It's due to bounce back. Like you look at Hobart going, it's due to bounce back. It's been sitting.
And markets don't work. It's not about taking it in turns or it's due or it's going to do it because somewhere else has done it. That's not how markets perform at all. It's a relationship between the various metrics on the housing supply side of things, and the secret source for housing demand is local economic conditions. Okay. So those things will determine whether a market goes sideways, backwards, or up, not confirmation biases.
I appreciate that. So someone's listening and they've got, and we'll go to that example where you've got a unit in Brisbane for that 10-year period where it did SFA, right?
Yeah, literally.
Would your recommendation be, and you can't know where that future is going to get to, right? You wouldn't know that it's going to last a decade of being in the doldrums. Could you suggest, hey, look, cut the asset, sell it, move on, and try and find a different location, or buying and holding on, going, look, at some point I'm in now. I've got to see this through a little bit more. How does someone make this decision or make peace with going, I think I need to cut this nice and early, or do I hold on for a little bit longer because at some point, like you're saying, maybe it's hope is the strategy, but you're going, well, I'm holding it. Do I just keep persisting?
Yeah, that's a big topic, an important topic. Personally, I find it much easier to forecast the outlook for markets as opposed to advising someone who's already got an asset, and realizing that the outlook for the market that I'm already in is not spectacular. Should I hold or sell that? That is a much more difficult decision than someone who says, I've got a parcel of cash or I've got equity and I want to use it. Where should I put it? I do that every day. So that's the easy bit. When you've already got money in markets, it's a combination of what's the outlook for that particular market for the foreseeable future, as well as exactly what asset do I have? Is it the right asset type? And then the transaction costs we were talking about earlier. So the easy bit for someone who's already got an asset, if I'm having a conversation with them, is to say, look, based on these characteristics, the outlook for that is it's going to underperform. That's the easy bit. But should you sell? Well, okay, now let's step through that. You sell that asset, you pay, let's call it $40,000 in agent's commission, you'll pay whatever in capital gains tax. Now, when you've sold the asset, you've got the cash in the bank. It's no point sitting there. You want to recycle it into another market. So you're going to pay stamp duty fees, conveyancing, you've got building and pests, you've got buyer's agent fees. So add all these up, there's $100,000, right? There's $100,000. And you've got to hope like hell that the market you put your money into turned out to be a good decision, because in a very, very short period of time, it's got to grow by $100,000 just to put you back into a neutral position. So I tend to, what helps me give good advice to someone who's contemplating holding or selling an existing asset, to me, how much cash flow is this taking from you is an important consideration. Is it owned in the right name? Sometimes people are holding an asset that technically is an investment property, but they bought it as their first home, way back when. And it might not be in the most suitable name for tax purposes now. So, there's another reason to maybe you might sell that. And what sort of asset? If it's an apartment, and we know that apartments over the course of time will never, ever, ever perform anywhere near as well as a detached house, they're the sort of things that collectively you sort of say, look, it's not an absolute no-brainer, but I'm leaning more towards if it was my money, I might dispose of that. Usually, when you go through all the pros and cons of holding versus selling, in a majority of occasions, Aaron, it works out better to hold.
Okay.
Knowing that no market's always going to do well.
Yeah.
We're all going to have periods when it is disappointing. You want to give it a hurry up, but it won't hurry up.
Yeah, like force something into it, which is I might do a small reno on it, putting more cost into it, or I'll add a granny on it, for example, and trying to really force that value as another school of thought that comes into it.
Yeah.
Are you trying to polish a turd for a better saying there as well? And from my perspective, to add to that discussion would be when you put that property into your portfolio and you look at the borrowing capacity perspective, is that a hindrance to your portfolio? Is it not really having an effect if you could squeeze out some equity then go again and that property is really not hampering? So is it a hindrance? Is it hampering your ability, or can you leverage that to then go and buy another asset as well? So that's my view of the world when I'm having that discussion with people going, is it impeding or impacting your ability, or is it a non-event? So have that. If you're at that crossroads of the conversation going, I'm holding this asset, is it really serving a purpose? I think just double back on this conversation a little bit and really just kind of jot down some notes, have a chat to your broker, your BA, for example, maybe even your accountant, because you know what CGT you're up for. But again, it's engaging your team around you going, hey, can we just shoot the breeze a little bit on this, rather than just kind of getting stuck in what you mentioned earlier, a bit of your confirmation bias and left to your own devices when you're looking at your portfolio performance as well. Thanks very much. I'm trying to think where we got to. Melbourne, and then Canberra, the last one was 1 to 2% growth. Looking at Canberra, that did just under 1%. So, again, you're bang on there. Canberra's an interesting one as well. What do you think's happened with Canberra? Why has that gone particularly flat?
Well, Canberra is very similar to Hobart. When I say that in terms of how they've performed in recent years, they're very different markets with different drivers. But again, if we go back to let's say 6 or 7 years directly before the RBA started increasing interest rates in May 2022, Hobart first, Canberra second. They were the two best performed property markets among our 8 capital cities for that 7-year period of time. When interest rates started to go up, they go up the same everywhere. But what we've seen is some markets, Brisbane, for example, dropped value for about 12 months and then quickly bounced and continued its growth cycle. Other markets like Hobart and Canberra dropped some value and have then continued to go sideways. What we put that down to is what I call buyer fatigue. It's had several years of a really, really, really strong growth cycle. Property is not something that people living in the city do every day. So when markets are strong in that 7-year period for Canberra and Hobart, lots of people had already upgraded their house or had already invested or already become a first home buyer, and they're taking a breather. And they won't get any significant growth until there's a burst in local confidence, something significant that impacts local economic conditions in a positive sense there.
Cool. Mate, awesome. Thanks very much. You look at your numbers and like I said, there's a huge amount of conviction when you go public with here's what I think it's going to do. And you reflect back on the year and you go, mate, you're pretty close to what your predictions were. And you've been doing this for a number of years as well. So, mate, kudos to you. If you're listening and you also want maybe some other source of info, I know the State of the States report that comes out from CommSec. We've had CommSec come on as well. Craig James from CBA again talk about the economy state by state. So if you wanted to go back to his discussion, that's probably another good podcast episode to listen to as well. Simon, question for you. Perth, you've acknowledged has been a strong performer. However, in our chats in the past, you said you haven't purchased there. That's an interesting discussion. Would you mind if we just kind of double down on that a little bit?
Yeah, love to. And look, for the record, and there's a digital footprint of this, Aaron. People can go on the Propertyology website and you'll see that from 2019, every calendar year through to including the one we've just started, our market outlook report, we have forecast Perth market outlook to be strong, and it's been strong. So, but what we're doing now is Propertyology sits in a position that we are completely borderless. We are emotionless to markets. Our job is to help people make intelligent decisions among the 400 townships across Australia. not the boring old 8 capital cities that are the only ones that people think about. And what we're doing is identifying opportunities for growth, but also being extremely responsible and knowing what is risk. And so if we've got the opportunity for market A versus market B, and we feel similar in regards to their potential for growth for the foreseeable future, but one has more identifiable risks than another, we're not behaving as a responsible professional by saying to someone, you should take on a higher risk than what you need to. Now, what do I mean by risk? Because I don't think anyone who invests in property really understands risk. They would think risk is associated with whether a city's big or small, I would think, or whether they would like to live there, or whether it's a capital city or a region. That's emotion talking. The evidence doesn't back up any of those feelings whatsoever. How we define risk is actually have a look at what has every single one of the 400 townships in this country, what have they done every single year for as far back as official records go? And so what we're doing in identifying risk is saying, well, this location in these years lost a lot of value. This other location in some different years lost a lot of value. Doing that 400 times for those 400 cities, and then digging deep into the periods when it did lose value to understand why did it happen. So when we've done those activities in the past, Perth and Sydney, this will surprise people, are officially the two most volatile property markets in the country. But they wouldn't think that's the case, right? Because Sydney's our biggest city, Perth is our fourth biggest city. So how can I say they're our most volatile? Well, that's not an opinion. The facts and figures prove that over the last 30 years, Perth and Sydney, their median house prices declined in 8 calendar years out of 30. No other location has had anywhere near that. The cause of the downturns in past years in Sydney and Melbourne are different. Economic conditions locally, I deliberately keep emphasising, with the biggest influence on a property market. But Perth's economy, more than any other city in Australia, depends so heavily on one industry sector. It's not a mining town, but a very large portion of the revenue collected by the state government of Western Australia each and every single year comes from mining royalty. So when commodity prices fall significantly, the clip of the ticket that the government takes on iron ore and gold and lithium and those sort of things is significantly less. The mining companies might mothball mines. And so the revenue that the city of Perth would ordinarily depend on to fund its public sector workforce, which is 10% of people who work in Perth, the revenue to build a new hospital, to build a new highway, to build a new train station, it gets cut. We were talking earlier about Melbourne and the economic woes caused by a different thing. In Melbourne's case, the high debt. I'm giving a different case study on Perth, but the problem is the same. In Perth's case, low commodity prices means low revenue. How that affects property markets is reduced capacity to invest in economic prosperity. Mm-hmm. So when you're living in a city and there's diminished economic prosperity, household confidence is lower, household wages and salaries are more fragile, fewer people have confidence in taking on a bigger mortgage to upgrade their family home, or fewer people want to get off the sidelines and become a first home buyer, fewer people want to invest. So if you've got less people living in a city transacting in real estate, there isn't upward pressure on asset values. That's how property markets work. It's not about the population piece. It's about, population growth piece that people think it is. 95% of people who buy property every single year in every city in Australia is the existing resident population. Doesn't matter whether the population booms like we spoke about in Melbourne or goes backwards. 95% of the people living there, they will be the buyers. Are there going to be a lot of buyers or are there going to be very little buyers? Will be primarily determined by the local economy. So Perth is I'm not saying it's going to crash. I'm saying it has identifiable intrinsic risks about its market, but other locations don't.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I mean, I've heard so many arguments we've even done deep dives on Perth, for example, in previous episodes. And, one of the big markers is but household income is one of the among the highest in Perth, and it feels like it's under market, it's undervalued.
So what?
Yeah.
So what?
I'm interested to get your perspective on it, because that's one of the arguments that gets thrown around, going, mate, really high incomes versus the house median house price, and it goes, well, they've got some strong incomes over there.
I would suggest arguments made by people who live in Perth.
Yep.
So they've got the confirmation bias of vested interest, and or the wishful thinkers who don't live there but they've invested there, right? People aren't honest with themselves.
Yeah.
I guess equating a market by the state or the city's median wage is completely useless. Completely useless. Your wage is different to mine and different to our mates and different. So it doesn't actually mean anything when we're looking at the median wage of something. Yeah. I deliberately keep repeating, because it's the most important thing for your listeners. Local economic performance will always be the biggest influence on property market performance. So making an educated assessment about the future of a property market, you need to focus on less than what's happening now, but what decisions have happened recently, and how is that going to influence the economy going forward, and what's the economic profile? Does it have incredible economic diversity, or is it over-reliant on one industry sector? It's not just mining, it's any industry. If you've got a big or small city that has a very high dependence on, what's another industry? Tourism, for example. Well, when there's threats to the tourism industry, which happen from time to time, the same as it happens to mining from time to time, fewer people will holiday, so there'll be less revenue spent in that location, which means jobs won't be as strong, incomes won't be as strong, confidence won't be as high. People need to understand the economic profile of locations and evaluate the outlook of those from there.
Cool, mate. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's jump into your 2025 property market outlook. I loved it. If you're listening, maybe we're going to post a copy, a link as well in the comments. We'll put a copy on our website as well. I love the deep dive, and that's what we're going to do, go around the grounds. And what you've said here is you've looked at 25 of Australia's largest cities, and what you're saying here is property booms are likely to occur in 11 off the 25, which kind of bodes well for the market, especially for investors coming into the year as well. And I'd love to kind of, I'll open this up to you to say, do you want to pick out a few? I've got a few of my suburbs that I want to have, areas that I want to have a chat about as well. Do you want to pick out some of the areas that you're eyeballing at the moment, and and why you're expecting such strong growth in those areas as well?
Sure. Maybe before I do, just to explain, what we've done is we've given the market outlook for this calendar year for Australia's 25 largest cities. We're not saying these are the best cities or these are the only. As I've said numerous times already, there are 400 townships in this country. The banks and the economists and anyone who publishes annual outlook reports, they only ever focus on the 8 capital cities, which is naive and ignorant to think that people only live in 8 cities, or even someone who lives in one of those 8 cities, that they don't care about what's happening elsewhere in Australia. Mm-hmm. To be really honest, no one ever publishes reports like this about anything other than the 8 cities, because they don't bloody know, mate. Mm-hmm. And if you did with them what you've done with me, and I'm glad you've done it, and hold people accountable and say, last year you said X, and this is what happened, and do that for them every single year, mate, they're never bloody close. So we wanted to do the 25 largest cities. It's not practical to do all 400. But we want to do the 25 largest because we like sharing and we want to educate people. No one should read this report and say, okay, those 5 cities have got the best outlook. Therefore that's where I should invest. I said last year that Perth's going to have a strong outlook. We were talking about that. It did have a strong outlook, and I've just been explaining why I won't invest there. So no one should ever make a big decision on a major asset with a 700,000 plus purchase for one asset based on the outlook for next 12 months ahead. I want to emphasise that. I'm glad. So you're going to ask me something there.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because here's the thing: you're going. These are the we'll pick out maybe 5 of the top regions that you're suggesting are going to do quite well. And punters reading it, they've heard this podcast. look, I've done my due diligence. I'm going to go out there and pull the trigger and go and jump onto real estate or domain and start having a squizzy around because I don't need to pay a BA. I'm going to go out there. I know the areas that Simon's predicted. He's got a pretty good track record.
Yeah.
What is stopping a punter from jumping into an area? And let's pick out one of the suspects that you're saying. I think it's Townsville that you're saying is going to do quite well.
Yeah, happy to talk about Townsville or any location. So Townsville, you mentioned big ball. So we've gone out and said Townsville, we think will have somewhere between 25 and as much as 30% growth in this calendar year alone. That is just enormous growth for Australia's 14th largest city. And Townsville is officially the biggest city in all of Australia, north of the middle of Australia. If you picture the map of Australia and draw a horizontal line through the middle of our country, Townsville is the biggest city north of that horizontal line, 14th biggest overall. But what everyone needs to consider about any location is, yes, what's the outlook? But just because something's going well now, it doesn't mean it will do that for the next 5 years. That said, Townsville, for as far forward as we can anticipate, has an incredibly strong outlook. But I don't want to talk. I want to talk more general about decision making as an investor, as opposed to individual markets for the time being. What you need to consider when you're about to invest, firstly, is what budget have I got? What can I afford? And what markets are accessible for that budget? Make sure you. I'm proudly very strong on never invest in anything other than a freestanding detached house. Beautiful. Because the decades and decades of evidence is compelling to ignore and do what I would call a compromised decision and say, oh, look, I would love to buy in City X, but I can't afford the $900,000 for a basic house there. I can afford the $600,000 for an apartment, so I'll buy that. Whatever that market produces in terms of its total growth over, let's say, the next 10 years, because you've compromised and bought an apartment, you're probably going to get about 50% of whatever growth the house has got. Decades and decades and decades of evidence has taught us that, and we'd be foolish to ignore that. So start with your budget and then look at what other assets have I got. And you need to adopt more of the Warren Buffett share investor here and not the naive, property owner and thinking about home, where do I want to live? You need to look at diversification within your portfolio. So if you own your family home with or without a mortgage, to me, the most intelligent decisions, the first place to cross off your list not to invest in is the city you're living in. Because doing so, you're breaking the number one golden rule of all financial decisions, and that's putting all your eggs in the one basket. Yeah. So when in future years your own hometown has that long lean run of underperformance, which literally every location has from time to time, you've created a situation when your entire portfolio is largely stagnating compared to other areas. So these are some of the things that you need to consider. As you accumulate multiple property assets, they should be spread across multiple cities and in multiple states. So someone who, for example, has a family home in Brisbane and an investment property in, Toowoomba, which is also in Queensland, you shouldn't be considering any other Queensland location, no matter how bullish individual outlooks would be, because you have an overweighted portfolio, using that example, in the state of Queensland. So lots of things to consider there.
Yeah, thanks very much. So going around, and like you said, 400 townships, you've pulled out 25, for example. What are the markers that you're looking at? Because you're looking at the forecast, you look at the vacancy rates, you look at the stock on market, 3-year changes, some of the metrics that you've outlined in your report. What else have you thrown into the mix to really kind of work out what are your top picks and what are the reasons that you're getting that forecast to be either really strong or quite mediocre?
So just make sure I understand the question. So is your question more what are the things we consider when we're forecasting the outlook for market? Is that what you mean? Yeah.
How did you get to this forecast percentage? What's some of the metrics that you've really focused on?
Yeah, when we do this all day, literally all day, every day, that's our job for every location in Australia. So it's never one thing. I said at the start of this interview, it's the combined sum of all factors. Many of the factors we consider are expressed numerically: a vacancy rate, an internal migration, stock on market. They're expressed numerically, so you can imagine we got hundreds and hundreds of spreadsheets with gazillion columns and all that sort of stuff. But the most valuable information is not expressed numerically at all. Circling back and sounding very robotic, but repeating the same thing, it's local economic performance. So you're not going to get the answer to that secret sauce from a number in a spreadsheet. We don't care about an unemployment rate. I don't give a rat's about an unemployment rate. It tells me nothing about the economy whatsoever. Darwin has had one of the lowest unemployment rates in all of Australia for the last decade, and a house in Darwin today is worth not much more than what it was worth 10 years ago. So economic information to us is in written text, in literally hundreds of different written reports from different levels of government, from different industry sectors, from new businesses opening up, existing businesses expanding. So I'd say that probably 70% of my day, every day, is consuming all sorts of different reports. And what I'm looking for is economic growth related initiatives. And it's hundreds and hundreds of those for just one city. Some of those reports will talk about something negative, a business closure or something like that. And then the next might be something exciting about, an infrastructure project or the exciting a business that's expanding its workforce or something like that. So it's combined some of all those things there. And that's our most valuable information in terms of future housing demand.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. Yeah, I think for anyone's listening and been a regular listener, we're not subscribing to, hey, here's the hotspots and here's where we're buying. In fact, a lot of the guests that we've had on do not actually either disclose locations they're buying or tell you this is where you could be buying. We very rarely do property like a profile, which is kind of different to some of the other stuff that I see on YouTube. As soon as you put an area up, bang, this thing just blows up with thousands of views. And I think if you're a listener, I think you are cut from a different cloth from a lot of other investors. I would have said it earlier. We're talking about foundations. We're talking about the fundamentals. We're talking about the reason that you're investing for a long-term game plan, not a quick get in. I want to buy in under market value straight away and like ride this intense growth uplift so I can keep scaling my portfolio. We're talking about time, tried, tested, good market conditions. The more the reasons as to why you're investing, as opposed to I want to brag that I've got a large portfolio. A lot of our clients that are top tier investors, you wouldn't even know it. There's not a lot of bells and whistles that come with their lifestyle. So I'm sorry to disappoint you if you're kind of looking going, this is a hot spot to invest. But I'd almost say that you are a little bit more mature than that as a...
Well, I think those who do that, it's reckless and it's irresponsible to do that. Anyone who does that, to me, is not a true professional, because there's going to be someone who's going to hear that podcast or read that report and they will act on that piece of information without any conversation whatsoever with the professional to consider their circumstances, and then the individual who's acted of their own accord, there's a high chance they buy the wrong asset on the wrong street at the wrong price as well. So that's why it's irresponsible.
Yeah. They're bought a price to get into the market is what I usually see. They've come to us. The brief is I have to buy in this area. It needs to be around this. Give me the borrowing capacity. Let's get in. Very little due diligence, very little property research is done on that actual asset. For example, I can say this having seen the quality of your work, the research and the methodology that comes out, Simon, when you guys do an acquisition. There is a lot that goes into buying a property rather than just simply locate, negotiate as well.
Yeah. There are, and this is why I started when we're talking about the outlook with the 25 locations.
Yeah.
I wanted to make that point. It's 25 out of 400. Without just releasing Propertyology's intellectual property, we're currently buying in, I think it's 9 or 10 different cities across 4 different states. Only 2 of the locations we're currently active in are among the 25 that are in that report. We have a massive country, big in terms of population size, has nothing at all to do with better or safer. Absolutely nothing to do. If I can remind your listeners of perhaps something we discussed last time, the most expensive real estate in all of Australia is Australia's 73rd largest city, a place called Byron, with a median house price of $1.5 million, that's had, over the last 20 years, some population growth, but well below the national average, let alone being the fastest. It's nowhere near a capital city. It's 7 hours drive away from a capital city. There's some other locations that are among Australia's 20 most expensive median house prices in Australia, and they've got populations of 10,000 people, 15,000 people. When we did a report about 3 months ago, I think it was, Aaron, we listed Australian towns or cities in terms of its highest median house price. So Byron's number one. Yeah. Sydney is number 4. But of the 20 most expensive towns or cities in Australia for median house price, only 4 of them are capital cities. And 2 of the 4 that made the 20 are ranked about 17th and 18th.
Wow.
So it's got nothing to do with size.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good information in our report about Australia's 25 largest cities, but I can't emphasise enough, remove the blinkers. Yeah. There's 400.
Thanks very much. I hope you're open to answering this question as well, which is then people go into the nuts and bolts of like the acquisition and the type of property. So, I see a big part that gets thrown around, particularly with higher rates or yield becomes a focus, cash flow. So I'm going to go to dual living. I'm going to go to granny flats, for example, or rooming houses, and they've all got their own, what would I say? They've got their own little quirks around lending, for example, as one part of the equation, particularly say rooming houses. But when you hear that, for example, red flags or thoughts or opinions, what do you say to that? Because some people immediately go into, what's the saying? When everything looks like a nail, you've got a hammer out, right? So, when
if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, smells like a duck, it probably is a duck. Another one, yeah. Do I get red flags? It depends. If someone's if I'm having a conversation with someone who's contemplating investing and they've got some interest in buying a house with a granny flat or a duplex or whatever. Yeah. The red flag goes up if I start to, during the conversation, realise that they're feeling that way because of a business that's, talking up that particular type of asset. And lo and behold, the business can build the granny flat for you.
Yeah.
Right? So that's when the red flag will go up. What I will say to people is you hold any asset long enough and it will grow. So it's not a bad decision in most cases as an investor. It's whether you can make a better decision. Literally, if you can picture the worst town or city anywhere in Australia that you would ever want to live in, and then picture the busiest road in that dog ugly town or city, and then picture a 150-year-old house that's falling down and crumbling on that really, really busy road, I promise you that property is worth a lot more today than 20 years ago. So that's one of the good things about investing in Australian real estate. It is literally the most resilient asset on the planet, bar none. But the question should be for everybody is, what's the best decision I can make? And where's the evidence that I'm drawing upon to make the assessment that this is the best decision? So in terms of asset types, we do know, this is indisputable, that a freestanding detached house compared to any other style of residential property will grow by a lot more in that city over the same period of time. So you need to compare apples with apples. So freestanding detached house in Townsville or wherever, in the same 20-year period of time, will grow by a lot more than the apartment, than the townhouse or the duplex or the house with the granny flat. The evidence is indisputable. That's not an opinion. Now, to explain why, we need to look at things through the lens of the buyer and not personalise it, not say to ourselves, well, I'm living in an apartment, so therefore it's good. No, because you're not the market. You're just one household. For growth to occur for anything, one needs to hold an asset that the biggest critical mass of people will have interest and financial capacity to purchase in future. So now, what is housing? Housing is shelter. We do know that 7 out of 10 households across Australia today are families. So 7 out of 10 is a big critical mass of people, right? A lot of families will go, you tell me whatever you want about that apartment, but I can't fit into that with 2 kids, or I can, but we don't want to live like that.
Yeah.
Or we're pet people. It's too hard for us to fight through legislation and find the apartment that can actually have pets. Townhouses and duplexes, we can sort of argue that they're a bit like a house because there's a freestanding land component to it, but they're not the same as a total detached house. You are effectively in bed with a neighbour. You are sharing a boundary. And when it comes to the 7 out of 10 buyers that are looking for a property, again, not Aaron or Simon as individuals, just the broader public, when someone's got 1, 2, 3 properties to look at, and one of those properties might be in the area that they want to live, might be within their price point, but hang on a minute, I'm sharing a wall with a stranger. This property over here that's in the area I'm looking to live in, and I can afford it, I'm not sharing the wall with a stranger. So you have more buyers when you've got the freestanding detached house. The granny flat, people sort of say, oh, I'll buy that because I've got one asset with 2 incomes. Might sound a bit really creative and look good in a spreadsheet, and you're getting more income from that property. That property will grow just like that grubby old house that's falling down I was describing earlier, right? It won't grow anywhere near as much as if the granny flat was not on it. Why? Because when you go to sell, 7 out of 10 potential buyers are going to be looking for a freestanding detached house as an owner-occupier. Owner-occupiers don't want the big concrete monstrosity that we call a granny flat on the property. They want to put the swimming pool there, or they want more grass for the kids to run around, or an outdoor entertaining area, or whatever. The minute you've got that big concrete monstrosity there, 7 out of 10 buyers go, that's not for me.
Yeah, you've really limited your buyer pool at that point. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah,
correct. Hey, mate, thanks very much. Last question. So when you're having conversations with people, and you probably get people at all sorts of buyer readiness stages, people that are, cold and thinking about getting in, and you got, hot to trot, and they're chomping at the bit to start getting into the market. How does an investor stack the deck in their favour in 2025?
Okay, so always remember, whether it's 2025 or any single year, the best time to invest is as soon as you can afford to. As soon as you can afford to. With 400 townships in this country, I can promise you from more than 100 years of evidence, it does not matter what shit is happening in the world. There will always be numerous locations across Australia where the outlook is exceptionally good. And you probably won't hear about it from the crap in your device, because the crap in your device all the time are going to focus on what's happening in the 8 capital cities. No, I've actually exaggerated that. The crap in your device primarily focuses on what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne, because the people who are writing the crap in the device, that's where they live, and they're our 2 biggest cities. And if there's something out of the ordinary happening in any of the other 8 capital cities, such as right now, Perth's been going exceptionally good, Brisbane and Adelaide have been going exceptionally good, so they're among the commentary. But the minute those markets get flattened out, you won't bloody hear about them, but every single day you'll hear about Sydney and Melbourne. So what you will hear, mark my words, let's talk about this in 12 months' time when you get me back again, Aaron.
Yep.
Throughout 2025, and this happened literally on 1 January 2025. They took 1 day to do this. Australian property markets is a reflection of what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne. On the 1st of January 2025, there was a whole heap of crap in my device saying Australian property markets are already in downturn.
Yes, I've seen that.
Right? Why are they doing that? Because Sydney and Melbourne, their median house prices in the back end of 2024 declined. And in our report, we expect them to decline throughout this year. Not crash, but decline. So the commentary every single day is going to be a reflection of that. In just the 25 locations that we've reported on, we've said that 20 out of 25 will grow this year. Grow might be 1%, or it might be Townsville, 25 to 30%. But growth is growth, right? Only 5 will decline, in our opinion, and they won't be crashes. Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Geelong, and Ballarat are the only 5 out of 25 that we think will lose value this year. The best of 4 markets aren't even in that report of 25 locations. But every single year, in the years when the interest rates were going up, and there was nothing positive written about property markets, Nothing positive. Let's have a look at what property values are worth today compared to when all that negative news stuff started writing. Most locations, not all, Melbourne is definitely a classic example, most locations have had somewhere between 10 and up to 50% growth since the RBA started increasing interest rates in May 2022, which is only 2.5 years ago. So remind yourself of this, like, don't be influenced by the commentary, whether it's positive or negative. If you can afford to invest now and you don't, it's your future that you're harming. Do that.
Yeah, I love it, Simon. Hey, mate. Yeah, like I said at the very start, I think you're a man of conviction. When you put your opinions out there, back it up, and you've been doing it consistently for a long time. I want to say kudos to you, mate. It's a real pleasure to have a chat. I think what you also do very well is you cut through a lot of the noise, which is the BS that comes out from headlines, media. The irony is, you kind of rubbish the media for all their headlines, and they keep coming back asking for your opinion.
Some do. There's a lot that I haven't heard of for a long period of time, so they've taken offence of some of the stuff. But hey, I'm not in it for the media. I'm in it to help 27 million people make the best decision they can possible. Yeah. And part of my role, I don't have to do this, but part of my role in doing that is the ones that we don't get to talk to, is to push information out through either our newsletters, social pages, or media interviews to try to flush out the rubbish that they're reading, because the consumer doesn't know whether what they've just read is good quality or crap. The consumer doesn't have the expertise in property market, so we've got empathy for the rubbish that they're reading without knowing that they're reading rubbish.
Can I just ask you a question about this, Simon? You said exactly that. I don't have to be doing this. I've got to assume that you've built probably either decent portfolio, you've got a pretty decent business that goes with
Absolutely.
it. House probably paid off. I don't know this from step it dark. I'd say financially you're probably well set up.
Yes, correct.
You don't have to work as hard. You could exercise, go home, have a cafe breakfast, and kick your feet up for a bit and choose to work part-time, but you don't. Every time I get in touch with you, you're emailing me at all sorts of hours. You're always on calls. Mate, what's the reason that gets you up and keeps you going in this game?
It's called passion, mate. I've got a teenage son who's just finished high school last year, and he doesn't know what he wants to do. He's been accepted in the university, but he's no different to me and most people I knew in the high school stage of their life. They don't know what they want to do. But I've said to my son, mate, do what makes you happy, and you'll be good at it because you enjoy it. I do what I do all day, every day, because I bloody love it. And I'll continue to put as much time and energy into it for as long as I love it. I can't imagine that there'll come a point in time when I don't enjoy what I call joining the dots. And to me, a property market of an individual town or city, Aaron, it's like a massive big jigsaw puzzle. And I don't know. Call me weird, call me quirky, call me whatever you want, but I get a lot of satisfaction out of finding all those pieces and then pulling them together and completing the jigsaw puzzle and going, oh wow, now there's lots of blue sky there, or oh wow, there's some dark clouds coming there. So that's why I do it. And it would be really, really boring and lonely if I just did that and just kept it to myself, right? I like sharing it with others.
I love it. Yeah, that real abundance mindset. That's a trait that rings true in a lot of people I've had on, where they're made it. Inverted commas, they've made it, but they're still happy to pass the baton on. And I think that's a wonderful quality that I see in yourself. A lot of other professionals that come on going, but I want to share my knowledge. I want to share my IP. I want to share my experience, for example, because I want to see that next generation succeed. And your success doesn't come at the loss of someone else's. It means the pie is getting bigger for a lot of people. And we talk about the ripple effect in this podcast as well, and the people that reach out. If you feel like someone that needs that little nudge to get into the market in 2025 and is constantly looking at the media or CoreLogic or some other type of metric based and reason to get into the market or not to buy, hopefully this is an episode that you can share with someone to go, hey mate, buy what you can, when you can, where you can, make some good decisions and seek out a good professional team to help you on that journey, because that is the strong foundation that you want to set up for long-term success. So Simon, I want to say thank you very much. Like I said, we'll include the details of your 2025 property market outlook We'll include details for people to reach out to you as well, should they want to scratch that itch and have a chat to you yourself and your team as well. Mate, thank you very much. And if you love this episode, like I said, please feel free to pass it on to someone that you think needs a little nudge to get started on their journey as well. Thanks very much. I'll talk to you soon.